All right, can we do this one more time? This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. We've done that a lot over the last couple decades, because we always know that every day is the day that the Lord has made. This one too. And today is a day to rejoice, because we have so much to celebrate, so much to rejoice in. Some of you have lamented to me that retirement is going to bring a lot of change here, as if that's a bad thing. I mean, those of you who have been here a while, you probably know that we've seen a lot of change here over the years, because things can't get better without change. When I started here, I was the only staff person. We only had one building that we now call the Great Room, and each part of the building that we have added over the years was because we were changing. This is a growing place. New people, new buildings. We've added a bunch of staff, a bunch of new programs and ministries, because change means that God is at work here. I read an article a while back about change in the church. Kind of long, but try to follow with me here. Everywhere we go, the story is the same. Churches are planted at a given moment in time by a given group of people, and with a vision of doing God's work in a given place. There is life and hope and joy and the thrill of being a part of the grand narrative of the gospel of Jesus Christ. The peace of the Lord is shared. People are drawn into this thing called grace. There is mourning and dancing. There is coffee and donuts and pie. I like that part. There are familiar faces, shared memories, common bonds, almost like a club. Bit by bit, people tend to settle in, get comfortable, then complacent, rigid even. But that's where I sit. I don't like that kind of music, but this is the way we've always done it. Money is raised for things called mission in distant places, those poor people, while members fail to grow in their understanding of the mission of God in their midst. Over time, as the neighborhood begins to change around them, as neighborhoods always do, the voices become louder and more insistent. Fear begins to ripple through the familiar emotions. Where are the people? Why doesn't anyone come to church anymore? Bit by bit, the numbers start to shrink, and the remaining members are faced with a choice: change or die. Most choose to die. Some will make some nods to the idea of considering change, but will never step out of their comfort zones or their certainty that their way is God's way in order for this to happen. The rate of death is a variable determined primarily by the willingness and ability of the last remaining members to keep the lights on. But remarkably, miraculously, there are some that choose change so that Jesus may live anew in their community, that they may feel in their bones anew the pulse of being part of that grand narrative, that the legacy of their life of faith actually looks the same to them regardless of the walls or the rhythms or the faces, because it looks like Jesus. When this happens, this beautiful, difficult, life-giving change, it can only be attributed to one thing. The people understood that this was not their church, but rather his. And as I read that, it seemed like I was reading about us. Not the dying part, but the part about people who understood that this is not their church, but rather his. It is. And he's been leading and guiding and showing up and sometimes showing off as we've continually added more and more to this family called Holy Cross. So change is a good thing, even in staff and leadership, because there are very few pastors who can lead a church through every stage of growth and development. Just about every church goes through predictable phases or stages of growth. It's a lot like how a rocket works. I have to get some science in here somehow, so bear with me here. When you launch a rocket and you want it to go to the moon or something, a rocket is made up of stages. You can't just shoot a rocket to the moon. It needs to have stages where each stage is full of fuel, and when that fuel is burned up, then you eject that stage before the next one starts. To get a rocket off the ground, you need a lot of fuel in that very first stage. Saturn V rocket that took Neil Armstrong to the moon, 2/3 of the fuel on that rocket were just in the first stage, and it took only 2.5 minutes to use up all that fuel. But it takes that much fuel, that much energy to get a rocket off the ground. And once you get to the rocket about 40 miles up or so, then you don't need as much fuel to get to outer space from there and eventually to the moon. So you can eject that first stage rather than carry the weight of that thing around all the way to the moon. The hardest part of launching a rocket is just getting it off the ground. It seems like that's what we've been doing for the last 30 years. Put a lot of energy into getting this rocket off the ground. And it seems like we're at a stage where the rocket takes a break for just a second. And the first stage is released, and then the next stage is where the fun begins. And the rocket gets to go to space or to the moon, and I guess pretty soon to Mars. And we have put a lot of energy into this place. But it's not for nothing, obviously. It's not just us at work here. God has been the one making all of this possible. And he found some of his followers here who were willing to be used by God, who stepped up and gave of themselves. And God used them and their willingness to make this happen. We've done this before, but I'm wondering if some of our charter members would be willing to stand right now. They're still around. And we need to express to you our gratefulness to you. Would you please stand, our charter members? Some of you. Stay standing. We are just grateful for your willingness to trust God, that God could make something happen here in this great experiment called Holy Cross. So stay standing. I know it might be challenging for you to do it, but do it. Please stay standing, all the charter members. If you've been here more than 20 years, please stand. Anybody here more than 10 years? Can you stand? How many of you have been here for any amount of time, including today? If you've ever been here to Holy Cross, please stand. And I ask you to stand because what we're celebrating today is we, not me. Look around. This is what we celebrate. We have made this possible. Working together with God, all of us putting our time and energy and our money and our witness into this place. And God was able to use what we offered, and he worked in our midst to reach more, including all of you. May be seated. Because a pastor can't make this happen. A pastor can't make ministry happen. A pastor could be the most enthused and energetic pastor on the earth, but if the members are a bunch of duds, it's not going anywhere. And there's a lot of churches out there like that. What's different here is the staff and the lay leaders, members of the congregation, we all have the same vision, and we all understand why we're here. And we are here not primarily for ourselves, but we are here for those to come, those who aren't here yet. Because we understand what God has explained in the Bible, that you can't get to heaven just by being a good person. The Bible's pretty clear about that when it says that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Another passage says, for the wages of sin is death. So it doesn't matter how good a person is, we're still not right with God until we can somehow get rid of all of this sinfulness. And so the Bible says then the gift of God